All right, we are live. Hey everybody, how's it going today? Joe Samflone here. Thank you for joining my stream today. So we're going to work on an interesting little project. So this came about for a couple of reasons. I want to talk about it real quick before we jump into it, so you understand what I'm working on. About a year ago, I challenged myself to a little project, which was to not use npm or to not use Webpack or Gulp or Grunt or anything on a really small project. I wanted to just write some npm scripts and see if I could actually use them as my only task runners essentially. And I was pretty successful at doing that. So it was a nice little project. It was fun. I had a good time doing it. I learned a lot about npm and how to use it. So it was great. It was well worth it. And a couple weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a student of mine. One of the things I do is I teach web design at Rutgers University here in New Jersey. So I was talking to one of my students, and he was kind of lamenting about a couple of interesting things. One of the things he was lamenting about was the fact that his current job uses Grunt, and he was, it was a little bit of FOMO. It felt like fear of missing out, where he didn't get to use Webpack. And I was like, well, they all kind of work the same. It's not really that big of a deal. But he was lamenting that because he really wanted to use that because he felt like more people were using this thing, or that's the thing he was hearing about a lot more than anything else. So he wanted to really kind of dig into it. And he was hoping that his position would do that, and they weren't. And he was also lamenting about the fact that he felt like there were too many of these things, that it's like, this week it's Webpack, and before that everyone was using Gulp, and before that everyone was using Grunt, and then there's this thing called Broccoli, and then there's this other one I think I heard called Jake or something like that. There's like a million different task runners, and he was kind of not sure what to do when he had a small project. Where should he what should he work on, what should he use? And I told him, I said, really, it kind of doesn't matter. Just pick one and use it and get good with it, and you're fine. But I also mentioned that you don't need to use any of these things if you don't want to. You could just use npm scripts, and totally had no idea that you could do that. He was kind of baffled by it, so he wanted to learn more about how to do that. So I thought about how to show people that we can actually use npm scripts and use them as opposed to using Gulp or Grunt or Webpack, and that's kind of what this video is going to be about today. I'm going to show you how you can kind of make these things yourself and run them. Now, the caveat to that is that there are obviously places where Gulp, Grunt, Webpack, all those tools make way better sense than writing your own things. I think if you're at a large enough company or you have a large enough application, this is not something you want to maintain on your own. I mean, you could. It's not the end of the world if you do, but that's the advantage, or one of the advantages of using all those task runners. Using them means that's just an extra layer that you don't necessarily have to worry about too much. You don't have to spend all of your time trying to build these things and maintain them, and then they break because something changed in Node or whatever. That's all handled by other people. So, if you have a super small project, and you want to just maintain, you need like one or two little things. You can totally write this stuff on your own. Excuse me. And if you have a big enough project, or you get to a certain size with your current project, and you want to use Grunt or Gulp or one of those things, you can totally do that too. So that's what this video is going to be about today. We're going to actually show you how to use these things, or how to use and write your own npm scripts, because it's actually really, really simple. You just got to kind of learn how to do it. All right, so without talking too much more, let us jump into the actual computer here and take a look around. So I've got this folder right now called Streams, and there's nothing in it. So we're going to set up a new site so we can actually run this. This is so we can run some code. So make directory firehose01. And we're just going to call this index.htm for right now. So I'm just going to drop a simple file into just this Firehose directory, and I'm going to create a new site. This command here that I'm running right now, I have an alias on my computer. So I use Laravel's Homestead to run all of my code because I normally do I'm a PHP developer also. So whatever virtual machine you have running on your machine, whatever you have actually, just basically set up a new site for right now. However you do that, just go about doing that. New site, this command that I have here is just an alias, and essentially what that does is, here I'll show you when I run it. It is going to pop up two files for me. One is the homestead.yaml file, and behind this is my hosts file. So I'm just going to create a new thing. Essentially, all this command is sudo sublime etc/hosts and what is it? That's all that new site command does. It just runs the Sublime command under sudo because you need to run sudo for the host file. So it's nothing crazy, but just instead of having to type this every time, I just kind of aliased it to new site so it pops open the files correctly for me. So let's create a new folder, new site, map. And where is this? Firehose 01. Home. Just hold it here to map that. I don't need to do it to a public directory. There's nothing going to be in here that's anything at all really funny. It's just going to be basically that index file. So there's no PHP. There's nothing else running in here. It's just this guy. So I'll just map it to that, Firehose 01. We don't need a database. We just need that. I think I've done that correctly. Close out that. Let's add our IP. One. All right, that's just because again the host file is under control of the admin user. Okay, that should be done. Now we should just be able to say homestead reload provision. And again, this is if you're using Homestead, you'll already know what to do. If you, however you set up your own websites on your own machines, just follow those instructions. This is nothing special that I'm doing here. I'm just running my own virtual machine. Booting VM, rebooting, loading everything, private keys. All right, come on. This may take a few minutes, of course. It always takes a few minutes. It's 33 seconds, or it's like 2 seconds when I'm doing this on my own, not live streaming. And then, of course, when I'm live streaming, it takes 52 minutes. Ah, there we go. Okay. Looks like we should be... Oh, one of your folders unable to mount. Yeah, so I screwed up something. So it looks like that wasn't able to mount. Let's go check that out real quick. Before I do that, let me go into Visual Studio Code and just pop that open here because we're going to be in that anyway. I'm going to create just a generic HTML page so we have something to actually test. Firehouse 1. Delete that. Okay, so that was created, and it looks like we have an issue with, oh, pop open my Firefox, see if we got that working. No input file specified. Okay, so we messed up somewhere. Let's go look at our new site. Sites stream Firehose 01. Home sites vagrant stream. Let's see. Let's just check it out. Oh, I called it streams. There we go. That's the problem. There is no stream directory. It's streams. So, okay, streams there. Streams there. We should be good now. Homestead reload, provision. Now it'll find everything. So we'll let it go through that process, and in the meantime, we'll just get this thing, close that out, and go into here real quick. All right, so Npm Scripts. There's a couple of different ways you could do this. You could set up your own kind of package if you wanted to, and then just pull in that package through, let's say, GitHub or something like that. So instead of, you don't have to put your packages in Npm, and you could just use, let me pop open this terminal here so we can work kind of in here. All right, so hopefully that's a good size and you guys can see it. If there's any trouble viewing any of this screen size, let me know. I have this chat stream open here, so this is I'm using Restream to stream to both Twitch and YouTube. I, in theory, should be able to see all messages that come through. I've not used it before, and this is a beta product, the chat feature. So we'll see how it works. If you're screaming into the void and I'm not seeing anything, I apologize. All right, so okay, all we gotta do here is, all right, yeah. So if you wanted to just install a package, let's start there real quick. That doesn't happen to be in NPM. You really could just do Npm install, and then your GitHub link. So whatever it happens to be, joe/foo.git. I think you could do, or you could do. You might have to do HTTPS plus Git or something like that. There's all these. There's an explanation everywhere on how to do this, but you can totally just pull in a package from anywhere. So if we wanted to set this up as our own package, just living in GitHub, so that way you and other developers could use it. That's one way of doing this. Another way of doing it is just actually putting all the files in your directory and putting them up in GitHub with all of your files, or wherever you store all of your files. So I think that's the way that we are actually going to do this. Let me double check that this is working. Firehose 01. All right. Oops. Okay. So how do we actually use this now? What's the first thing we do here? Yes, beta software is the best. It's like living just a little bit dangerously when you're trying to do everything. It's like, let's just see how this works and kind of hope everything we play with works. All right. So step one, let's just create an npm package. Npm init. This is just going to run you through the utility of creating a package.json file. You don't need to do this if you just memorize all of your npm, like how that JSON file is going to look. I don't have it memorized, so I'm just going to create my own. Package name firehose is fine, version 1, whatever, description, entry point. Test command, we don't have any test commands. No git repo at this point, no keywords. I'll be the author. MIT. Is that okay? Yes, it is. All right, awesome. So we have our package.json file. So this is just the standard package.json, and as we install things, and you'll see, you'll get the description and all the different everything will this will kind of fill out as we go along. But this is a good starting point for everything. So the first thing we need to do is, where are we going to store these things and how are we going to do this? I'm not going to, like I was saying a second ago, I'm not going to run this as its own package. I'm going to just install this. I'm going to pretend I'm installing this in my own directory and my own files. So again, my thought process here is that this is a thing that I would use on a small project of my own where it's just kind of tiny. Maybe I'm just using Sass and some other little things, and I don't need to install Grunt or Gulp or Webpack or any of those things. Like, that's just going to be too much for whatever reason. So I don't need to set up a package, but I want to. Yeah, I don't think anybody writes their own package file by hand either anymore. So all right, how do we start this thing off? So again, where am I going to put these files? So this is just going to live in my own directory. I'm pretending this is a brand new project, right? So let's just create a directory down here. Make directory, and I'm going to call this .bin. Right in Firehose 1, and it's right there. Now I'm using this .bin name because this is the name that if we did want to convert this to a package later on and put this on GitHub and other people can download it, the .bin file is, I think it's sort of special to NPM, that essentially it'll look in a .bin file and then copy the files correctly over to the main .bin. So what will happen is if you run npm bin, like let's say this is a package and we download it, you run npm bin, it'll take anything that it sees inside of its node modules folder and move any bin files up one level to a .bin directory. And then that allows you to just run things smoother, so you don't have to try to like run a file inside of anything. It just knows where all the bin files are, or it's like a symlink kind of deal. So it's pretty cool. So we're just gonna create the .bin name, so that way if later on down the road we wanted to actually move this into its own package file, we can do that without having to like rename all of our files and everything. So all right, we got that .bin directory, and then I'm also going to create down here a source directory, and the source directory is just going to be where we have all of our source files, where we're going to just put our stuff. And inside of there, I'm also going to put source. We're going to put Sass, and that's going to be our Sass directory. That's where we have just all of our test files that we're going to kind of test things out with. So there you go. We have source Sass right there, and we have this index file. So let's just let's make that our first test, or our first file that we're going to run. We want to do Sass, so we want to compile a Sass file down into CSS, and we don't want to use Gulp or any of those things. So the first thing we need to do is pull in some files that I know we're going to need right away, right off the bat. So npm install. I know I'm going to need something called shell.js. That'll help us run some shell commands. I'm probably going to need fsextra at some point down the line, so I'm going to pull that guy in too. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I need. Oh, node Sass. That would probably be important, right? So let's get those three things going. Trying to think here if there's anything else that I need. I'm looking at my list of stuff for this initial. No, I think that should be okay for the moment. Yeah. All right. So we're going to let that go. This is going to update in a moment. We have node modules popping in. Good. While that's going, I'm also going to create a new file in here, and I'm going to call this css.js. Yeah. So what is this? Okay, we got our packages installed. What is the CSS.js? This is what's actually going to be doing all the work. You could do this. I've seen some people do this in kind of like the scripts line, but I actually kind of like to just pull this stuff out. It's just it's nicer to kind of have everything pulled out in their own files, so you can kind of be a little bit more. You can think them through a little bit clearer. So this is where we're going to be doing all of our work. This is where all of our Sass stuff is going to be located. So let's do the compilation of our Sass files right now. First thing here, we got to actually tell the interpreter what to actually interpret this with. So that's where we do our hash bang up here at the top. So, or the other way around, right? Or no, yeah, it's hash bang, and it's user bin env node. And I'll be 100% honest with you. This is what triggers the interpreter to use node. I know that. I don't know why. There's a specific reason why, and I don't remember what it is now, to use the bin version. I think it's just going to pull whatever whatever version of node it can find off your machine to actually compile this. Like, you don't want to use, like, this is the way to do it. There is a Stack Overflow question that kind of answers why to use user bin environment node as opposed to just using like the path to your direct version of node. But I don't remember why. I just know it's one of those things that we do. All right, constant. Let's open up the shell equals require. We're going to require, what is it? Shell.js right there. All right, so this is going to be using our shell commands. And how do we do this? How do you actually use Node, or not Node? How do you actually use Node Sass to compile your stuff? If you were to do this in the terminal, it's actually pretty simple. It's just node Sass and then your commands. So if I were to do this down here, I think this will run. Okay, it won't run in there right now. I was hoping it would, but essentially what you're doing is you're calling Sass, and then you're setting a bunch of configuration options, right? And then you're going to set your input and switch your output. That's what we're trying to accomplish here in this thing. And that's kind of it. So let's set this up. So we're going to say let input equal, and then this is where our files are going to be located. So where did we put this? We put this in source, Sass, and then let's output equal, where do we want to actually drop these files at the end of the day? I'm going to say public assets CSS. Yeah, that looks good. That's probably where I'd want to put my files if I did that. And then we just want to excuse me. We just want to set up some configuration options and actually run our shell command. So we have this shell.js installed, so we can actually say shell.execute. I think it's exec, yeah. And then let's do node Sass, and we're just going to follow this thing. So we're going to say, what's our configuration variables that I want? Well, I want output style. I like it nested, so I set this to nested. I think this is default, is nested, but I'm not, I don't ever remember. Source map, I'm going to set this to none. I don't want to use my source maps in here. I don't want source maps to be created by Sass, because later on we're going to use some post CSS in here too. So I don't need a source map created by Sass and then a source map created by post CSS. We'll just have this one file and call it a day. I will want it to actually ring a little error bell for me. And then we just call the input. Input -o output. And close it out. I'm going to move this guy just a little bit so you can see that. So it's just input, the -o is for output to the output file, and that's where it's going to go. All right. That should be it for the most part. There's fancier things we can do, and we'll do a couple fancier things after this, but that's kind of your starting point. This should work now. Obviously, there's no Sass files yet, so let's create a Sass file for this thing. New file right in here. We'll call it main.css. And what are we going to put in here? We'll just, text color, and we'll call it #444. And then we will call, let's see, we'll just do body. Font size is 12 pixels. We'll just use a hard pixel number, and we'll set the color to text color. And here, let's just do some little fancy padding equals 0, margin equals 0, just to reset some margins and paddings, just so you can see that there's actually some stuff going on here. All right, so we've set a font size, we've set our text color to 444, and that's it. That's our super awesome file. Now, is this going to work? No, not yet. We've got the commands to work, so hopefully this will work, but we got to wire this whole thing up. And there's a couple of different steps we got to take to do that. So the first one is, this is not executable on your machine yet. So we actually have to make sure that this file is executable. So we do, in our terminal, we do chmod +x .bin /css.js. And we're just setting that to make sure that it can actually run on our machine. If you don't do that, you'd get an error just saying permission denied. So that's done. Now we actually need to wire this up in our package.json file. So see this little scripts area right here? Let's just call this build CSS. And we're going to just call right to the file. So that's bin css.js. Now everything should be wired up to actually run. So we've just told npm that there's a script in this directory, and when we call build CSS, we want to run this bin css.js file. So we've set the permissions, so we should be, in theory, good to go. How do you run these scripts? You just do npm npm run build CSS, and let's see if we get any errors. We might. Probably not a problem. Then we got an error. Oh, no such directory, because I did the dot. It's .bin. And we got another little error. It's good. What do we got here? Oh, I typed user, USER. It's saying I can't find that interpreter because it's USR. Clear. Run it again. There we go. Cool. So it ran, but it said no input file was found. So it couldn't actually find anything here. It couldn't find these files, or couldn't find this file. And that's because input is actually expecting, I believe, main.scss. So this is actually expecting an input file. It's expecting an output location and an input file, if I remember. And we might be able to just say source sass with just a slash and it'll find everything. But let's do this first to check it out. No input file again. What the heck? Source Sass. What are we doing here? That should be right. Let's see. Oh, I bet you I don't need this. Yep, there we go. So what that was just, this wants to run out of the, this is running kind of local to wherever these files are located. So you just can use relative pathing. So I just had, instead of saying the hard, slash source, which would have taken it all the way back to the beginning of my directory structure, and it was looking in /source/sass as opposed to the actual relative path. That's why I couldn't find it before. So by removing that slash in the front, it was relatively pathed to this location and could correctly find, sites, streams, firehose01/source. So did it work? Let's look. Public assets CSS main.scss. And there we go. Pretty simple stuff. That's, what is this? One, two, three, 4 lines of what you could potentially call JavaScript. It's just really using this shell execute command. Nothing really crazy here going on. And now I'm pretty sure we can actually also do this if I wanted to. And let's rm -rf public. And let's run that again. There you go. So we're now relative to the source directory. We just say and look in that input folder for anything that you can possibly find that's a Sass file, and compile that for us. And it worked. So really simple stuff here. Nothing too crazy going on, but let's make this a little bit better, because this is okay. This is nice. It's doing something for us. But number one, if you had to change this Sass directory, or if somebody else has to change this Sass directory, you don't want to tell them, oh, you go to the bin file, go to the css.js folder, and that's where you would make your changes to all of your stuff. You want to kind of manage that somewhere, right? Or at least I do. I don't want to. I want to make sure that my code is in a central location. We can actually do that in the package.json file. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. It's actually really, really simple. We can kind of you can put anything you want in here. You can create it's just a JSON file. It'll either be used or it won't be used. So put whatever the heck you want in here. I like to have, and you've seen this before, I'm sure, config sections. That can be used. So we're going to create a config section here. And I'm going to call this source, and then I'm going to create a distribution folder. So this is where everything gets distributed to or from or to. And here we're going to call path, and I'm going to call this, where is that? Source. And in here we're going to have path, and this is public assets. And then I like to have a folders section. And these are the different folders that I want to have. So I'm going to call this styles. Styles go into, when it's distributed, to a CSS folder. And we're going to mirror that name right up here. Folders. Styles. Sass. So the reason why I call it styles as opposed to CSS is because it's not CSS. We're not using a CSS folder, we're using Sass. So if this is less or something like that, it might just kind of confuse people if they saw like source.css, and then they were trying to find that directory, and they're like, this doesn't exist. It's kind of just one of those like kind of mental tricks to remember that, or to know that it's something different. All right, so we have this pathing set up right here. Now, how do we actually pull this in? Let's save that. It's actually really easy too. We can just pull it in right up here. So this require stuff works nicely. Constant. We'll call it config. Require. Package.json. Oh, sorry, this is gonna be and we want it out of the current working directory essentially. So we don't want to. We could just do. This is how we do this. This is the easiest way I've always found. Process.cwd. So we're basically just process.cwd is current work. It stands for current working directory. So it says wherever this is being run from, go to that point, and then append package.json to the end of it. Done. And that's the whole file. We don't want the whole file. We want just the config section. So now this config variable is actually just going to be the config section of our stuff. So great. Now let's go into here and make some changes to this. So that way it's actually a little bit more, so it's actually dynamic in this case. So we're going to do, what did I call that section? So we have config, we have source, slash, and then this is our style section, right? So we can do source dot, oh, sorry, config.source. Config.source, and then config.source folders is a little long, styles, but it gets the job done. And then it's the same thing here. Config.dist in this case, slash config, oops, dist.folders.styles. And that's it, right? For this thing, now we can just say, okay, when you're now if there's, let's say, a change that we need to make, we need to move from something from source to, let's say, our resource directory. It's just one place we have to change it. We don't have to change all of these files, because if you create a bunch of these files, you don't want that to keep going in and changing these things out. We can go to our package.json file and change those out in there, and everything changes, and it should be good. So this should just work unless we miffed it. But let's make sure. No input file was found. Did I do the same thing again before up here? Oh, path. That's the part I missed. Okay. Source.path. Sorry, folks. Dist.path. Save that out. And npm run build CSS again. Boom. Created the file. Still right there. Everything's still good. So that was pretty easy, right? Nothing crazy going on there. But this is getting more usable. But now there's, you know, a couple of little things here. Somebody would say, I think the next thing a person would say is, well, this is great. Every time I want to run it, I can use it. But, you know, I don't want to have to manually run this. I want this thing just to run for me. So how do I just watch this? Is there a way to watch it? I think that would be number one. And number two, somebody would probably then say, okay, and once you get this thing watched, if I were to do this on some sort of output in a production environment, I don't want my styles nested. How can I make this so that way it's not just nested styles, or it's we can compress these files based on environment, production versus development environment. So let's do those two things right now. The first one, which is the easy one, I think, or the easier one of the two, is just how do we set up a production environment for this thing? Very easy. Let's go back into our package.json. And let's just set up an environment, env, and we'll call this dev. Close that out. Now we can just do in here, if we want, we can put an if we want. We can say, you know, let's do it like this. So let's say output type or style is equal to config.env is equal to production. Then we would want that to be what? What is it? It's not nested. It's not minified. I forget what the heck the word is. What are the different output styles? It's like nested and not nested. I forget what it is. It's like compressed or something like that. Whatever. We can say it's, you know. No, now I gotta look that up. That's gonna drive me crazy. Sass styles, Sass versus, because I forget what the heck it's called. Output styles. Maybe just minified or minified or something like that. I forget what it is. Let's look it up real quick. CSS output styles. This should be quick. Oh, it's a video. Expanded, compressed. There it is. That's the one we want. All right, so compressed. So if we are in production environment, please be compressed. Otherwise, be nested. Make sense? Everything good there? Good. And now we can just take this and put this as a variable right here. And this is still nested because I think we kept it as production. All right, and now if we go over to our package.json and change this to production, run it again. Boom. So now it's all compressed. I'm going to change this to dev because I don't want it to, I want to actually see any of the changes I make to the files. But that's it. Now it's ready. You can just swap out that environment variable in your code and, you know, keep that somewhere on your server and you're good to go. So that was pretty easy, right? Nothing hard here at all. I mean, really, the hardest part about this thing is just remembering what the output styles for all these things need to be. And I mean, and then you're just executing a command on the command line. But watching, that's the next thing again. So somebody's going to say, great, all right, so now I have a production output style, which is wonderful, but how do I actually watch these files? And there's a cool little package called onChange that we're going to use in here. Npm Install onChange. That makes this actually really, really super easy to do. So let's pull that guy in. And while it's doing that, let's go over to our package.json and let's create another script real quick over here. So we're going to call this watch. Oops. CSS. And this is going to run out of the .bin directory again. Oops. Bin watch css.js. So this is just kind of my naming convention by having it like CSS and then watch dash, whatever it is. So you don't have to follow this naming convention. You don't actually even have to do this build semicolon thing and watch semicolon. That's just what I use. I do this because it just kind of makes better sense to me. But feel free to say whatever you want. If you wanted to just call this Sass and then you'd run npm run Sass or whatever on your local machine, you could do that. It's just come up with a convention that you and your team or that you're going to remember and you like, and just use it. That's kind of it. So all right, we have our bin watch.scss or watch-css. Save that. Oh, what happened? Okay, compare. Yeah, it reloaded and then it didn't. So let's just take this line in. Oops, don't do that. This one's revert. Which one is discard your changes and revert to the content on disk? Yes. All right, so I just took those changes from the file. It didn't reload. There might be a way of changing this, but Visual Studio Code, if the file reloads on its own, it doesn't always. It may not refresh if it's open. So you have to when you went to save. When I tried to save right there, it was just like, nope. There's changes. Watch CSS. We'll just change this real quick. All right, cool. That's done. So we have our on change stuff here, and now we just have this new thing. All right, I'm gonna just we can duplicate this file. We don't need the whole thing, but we'll just duplicate this. Watch.css.js. All right. So what I did there was simply just duplicate that file. And now we are in this watch.css thing. So what do we need here? Well, we don't necessarily need this command yet. We don't need this stuff, right? We don't need the output style. And we don't even need the output folder. You'll see why in a moment. So what we do need here is our shell, our config, and our input file, our input folder. Then we just need to tell it what we're actually going to run. So in here, we're going to run on change, and we're going to give it our input folder. So we're just looking in this folder on change, and we're going to do something. So there's a couple little commands I like to do. -v means verbose, mean like actually spell out what the heck it is you're doing when it runs, because I think on change would just run and you wouldn't necessarily know, or might just say on change and not anything else. There may be other output that we want to actually dump to the screen, so we tell it to be verbose. -I. This is just saying when we run this command the first time, the initial command, actually run this command. So when we run watch.css, it's going to run through this. OnChange is literally just looking for a changed file. And if it doesn't see one, which on the initial run of the command, it wouldn't see one, it wouldn't compile. It wouldn't do anything. And that's not the way we want it to work. We want it to work where the first time we go, we actually compile. We don't want to have to run first, you know, CSS build, then CSS watch, or whatever. We don't want to do it that way. So we just say initial. The -I means run this command on the initial, on the initial run, and then we do this -- which basically just says, okay, what after this is going to be the command that you run on change. So it says on change of these files, do this thing, which happens to be here. So what's the thing we want to do? Well, we just did it. npm run build CSS. So we're saying, on a change to a file in that directory that you're watching, run the build command for us automatically, please. And we save that. And now we got to chmod this, because I don't think we did that. +x. Bin watch. Now we should be able to say npm run watch CSS. And it executed the command at first. That's why it said command completed. So it ran it, and now it's just sitting here watching and waiting. So let's go actually make a change to this file real quick. Let's go over here and let's say, let's add an A tag and say, you know, text decoration none. Save, and you can see it real quick down there how it just ran. So it's waiting for us to actually make changes, and it's doing that directory wide. So anywhere in this directory, it's just waiting to see if there's a SAS file that changes. So if we created more SAS files, it'll run. Done. Now if we go over to our main, there you go, and it's running. All right, awesome. So now you have the ability to watch all your files in your CSS directory or your SAS directory, make whatever changes you want to make, you know, and run, all with essentially, what is this? You know, 3-4 lines of CSS or of JavaScript there, and then another, well, we said 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or what, 10 lines of JavaScript in this total to make this all run, and most of it's just variable setup. Nothing going on here, nothing crazy at all. So that's it. If you wanted to use SAS and nothing else, you could do this. And again, now you just push this code up to your GitHub repository, let's say, and anybody else can work in this file. You just tell them, yeah, just run npm install, and when they run their own npm install from the package.json, it's going to pull down all these files that they'll need, their dependencies, and then these bin files, they should just run, and you should be good to go. Now they can run npm run whatever. They may have to run chmod plus X on their own device, but I don't think so. I think once it's set up, it should be good. It's going to be executable. So what else can we do? Because that was really easy, right? Like, what else can we actually do in here and make this thing a little bit more robust? Because that would be, I think, the next question somebody would say. They'd say, okay, great. So I can do SAS, but I also use Vue.js. I also use, you know, I want to do image compression. I want to do whatever. You know what I do too is I run in my own personal setups when I build code. I use post CSS and SAS. So how can I use them together in here? How do I actually make sure that everything kind of works and flows nicely with each other? So that's actually not that hard to do. How we do that is by doing this. We go over to, we're going to create a new file. We'll actually use it inside of our CSS. So I'm going to call this, these are all just CSS things, right? So this is where we do anything that needs to be done to CSS or SAS files. You could separate this out. You could have a post CSS and a CSS file, but I'm going to just do all the work kind of in here. So let's first pull in the files that we need, whatever those files happen to be. Sorry, hold on a second. I don't want to just... All right. All right, so the first files that we're really going to need here is just, we're going to need post CSS, right? We actually need to get and make sure that we have post CSS in here. So let's just install all the different packages from post CSS. And the packages that I use when I write post CSS stuff, I'll bring them all in right now, and then we can just kind of see how I set this whole thing up if this was just so npm install post CSS. Then I use post CSS -cli for this command line stuff, post CSS.next or CSS next to get some next-ish features. I use this post CSS import, which is really cool. And let's do pix to rem. Post CSS pix to rem. And anything else do I want to pull in? Import. We can do flexbugs. Flexbugs fixes. So post CSS xbug fixes should be the name of the whole thing. All right, that's going to take a minute to install everything. Oop, broke it. Post CSS. Oh, flex bug. It should be flex bugs. Fixes. That should be good. All right. That's going to run. And then, yeah, let's let that go for a moment. And let's just go look at what our bin file is going to have to change to. So the bin file now, the CSS.js file, is going to have a little bit more work obviously going on in it, right? We need to take the outputted CSS and then run that through post CSS too. So it has to do something and then output somewhere else and do something and then do stuff to that file. So we can actually do this two different ways. We could just let it dump the file to one place and then run post CSS on that file, which is totally fine. And then the other way we could do it is shell execute will actually return some stuff for us, so we could actually use the shell execute whatever returns from there as our as a variable to input into our next command line. But let's just keep this really super simple, and let's just do this right here. So we're running this node sass, and we know that it's going to output to this config dist folder, and it's going to already be a CSS file for us. So now we just need to say after it runs to actually just run our post CSS on it. So shell execute. These are going to execute synchronously, not asynchronously. So it'll actually run this command, finish this command, and then run the next command for us. And then we can just say post CSS. So I have the CLI tool installed, so that's why I can actually call post CSS this way. And then we can say whatever the output folder is. And I think we have to specify the CSS file name. So I'm going to do this for now. I'll double check that after we run this, but I think that's what we have to do. And then we just tell it where we actually want it to output this file. And we just want it to output in the exact same spot that it is. So it's -o. So we're going to just say output yourself right back into the current folder file. And then we need to set up our configuration. So this is where we have to add a little bit of extra stuff. So post CSS, we have a bunch of files and a bunch of things that we're importing in here. So we want to actually maintain a configuration file of some sort. So -c. And we'll just say, where's that going to be located? Just post css.config.js. So we need to create that file, obviously, and we're just going to drop it right in this local directory here. Post css.config.js. So all we've done here is we're just creating a config file that's going to kind of list out everything else that we wanted to do for us. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. So, but now again, we can kind of maintain these things separately. So if you had somebody who was like, well, you know, now I want to make all these things, I have to go into this config file. Well, yeah, but it's just the same with your package.json. And once it's done once, that's kind of it. But you don't have to go through this a million times. You just run post CSS, and then you update your config file and you call it a day. So, all right, let's, what are we going to do in here? Well, we're going to need a constant, and I'm going to pull in my config file that we had, or our config JSON stuff. So config equals, what does that require? We could just say / package.json and .config. So we're just grabbing current directory, package.json file, which the current directory is the same. It's all the same directory. module.exports function ctx and now this is just kind of the export function. This is your kind of ES6 modules setup right here. So nothing too crazy, but we're going to return and we're going to work in here. So what do we want this to do? So again, we have, this is just kind of now a list of a JSON object essentially, or it's just a JavaScript object that we want to add some values to. And what are we going to do in here? So the first one is map. I don't want this to run a SAS map for us again, or a source map. So map, and we're going to set that to, we do want it to run, I'm sorry. We want PostCSS to run this, but we don't want it to run inline. So by default, it wants to, it's going to just drop your source map right in the same file as your PostCSS stuff, or as your CSS, which I don't like it when it has just this gigantic extra bit of code. It's essentially can double the size of your your file by just dumping all this stuff in there. It's just not needed. So I just tell it not to do this inline. So inline false. Now it'll just create a source map as a separate file. And we have a whole bunch of files that we, plugins that we want to use, right? So you get these commands and how to run this stuff just by looking at, if you go look at your plugins on postcss.org, I think it is. Let's see. postcss.org, I believe. Yeah. Bring this guy over here so you can take a look at it. So this is just postcss.org, and if you go to plugins, let's look up. This is just one plugin. It'll explain usage and everything in here, so it'll actually show you. Where's the config? Features, usage, right? By the way, somewhere over here. So it's going to, it shows you how to like run this. Okay, this is CSX Next. These are the features we want, yada, yada, yada. So it's going to show you kind of how to use this file and how to get these things kind of set up in your everywhere. So, all right, we have this plugins directory. Well, what did we pull in? Right, so I did pull in PostCSS pix to rem. This is one of my nice little favorite ones here. Pix to rem. And all this does is it runs over your file and it looks for any pixel values and it changes them to rems for you, which is nice. You can tell it to do this to any property, all properties, or just a certain specific subset of properties. So if you just wanted to do this to fonts, you can do that, or like the font family stuff. I like this because I've said this to, I always say this to developers. You want to work in the same language as your designers. You guys need to have a domain language that you are consistently talking in. And sorry, developers are the only people who ever talk in rems. And we don't really, and rems don't make sense to anybody else. Saying 1.2 rems is absolutely meaningless to all of the designers out there unless they happen to know what it is, what a rem is. And they don't work in rems. Like they're, if you open up Sketch or you open up Photoshop or you open up InDesign or you open up any of these programs, it is points or pixels. That's it. That's what they work in. So the domain language that I like to talk to with my designers is in pixels. So I always talk about things in pixels. I say, how many pixels is this? Move that 3 pixels to the right. Make that font 2 pixel size, 2 pixels bigger. Because they understand that, and I do understand that too. So I don't then say, oh well, okay, well, 2 pixels bigger is 0.257 rems larger on with my. Screw that. I just said it. I just have pix to rem that does that for me. So I write in pixels. My designers can think in pixels, and then I let PostCSS handle it for me from here. So In our case here, we can just kind of go with the defaults, but I'm going to show you the ones I normally use. So I tell it to set every property. So prop list, nope, sorry, it's prop list. And this is where you would give it a list of whatever properties you happen to have. I'm going to set it to all of them. Root value, default is 16 because that's what the default browser size is. But if we had set our default browser size to, let's say, 62.5%, which means all of your pixel values, or everything gets kind of shifted down. So that would be when you then say 1em would be equal to 10 pixels. Or 1 rem is equal to 10 pixels. So if we shift this down, we can then just tell it that our root value is 10, let's say. We don't need to set this, but that is a value I normally set. And I don't ever want this thing going into a media query, so or setting media query values. So if it looks at a media query, it'll make those changes, but I don't want it doing that. So I set anything to do with media queries to false, just because I've had this bite me in the butt before in the past, and I don't want it to run that. All right, so that's just our only plugin right now. We'll just say post CSS pix to rem, property value set to that, yada yada yada. Okay, we should be that should be enough to kind of just see this thing work its way through it. So we have our config file. So again, post CSS is now going to run after this thing. So let's see what happens. Might have broke something. We'll see. It did something. Rendering complete, saving, and there we go. See this? We got a SAS map file right here. So we know that this is created by post CSS, so I know post CSS ran. And let's look at this. Font size has now been changed to rems. So, and it set this source map folder file right in here for us. So boom, we now have this thing working. And since we just did the changes inside of our SAS or our css.js file, which already has this watcher on it, we've got watching of these files built right in too. So now if I go npm run watch CSS, it'll run. And then if I make a change here, let's say we add font size 22 pixels because we're crazy. It ran, everything ran. Go look here. Boom. And that's actually using, again, the pix to rem thing is working. Close. So that's it. That's how we could actually just create our own little watchers and our own little CSS and JS things, right with using just Node, and you don't have to go crazy, and you don't have to use all of these programs if you don't want to. You don't have to use Gulp. You don't have to use Grunt. You don't have to you don't have to feel afraid that if you're not using the latest thing, then the world is going to end. You could just use these, you can just create your own little thing that's going to work for you and your project, and then you don't have to worry about it. Again, I do caution you that if you do this, you may have to teach people how to use it. You may have to show somebody else how to use it if you get to that point. You may have to create a whole bunch of these things. So, there's a repository of Gulp, Grunt, Webpack packages. So you already have all of those at your fingertips. Maybe they don't work exactly the way you want to, but they're already there. You may have to tweak just a little bit. If you were to use this style, you write it all yourself. So if there isn't a package, which there won't be, for something, you're going to have to write it. And that's neither here nor there. It's not bad or good. It's just is what it is. So you either write your own configs and your own npm files as needed, or you download and use Gulp and Grunt and all those things, and just be happy with it. So either way really works, and that's kind of it for the show today. So I'm gonna head out. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you see here, these videos are gonna still stay posted on YouTube. if you like what you're seeing, I really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. I got a whole bunch more stuff coming soon, so yeah, stay tuned for all that stuff. And yeah, you know, just oops. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll see you soon.